Well, hello and welcome everyone to this Fireside Chat with Aldebaran Resources CEO and Director John E. Black and co-founder of Digest Publishing and editor of Daily Profit Cycle, Gerardo Del Real. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that you can all submit questions at any time on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll get to them after the discussion. And as always, this chat is being recorded and will be available to watch afterwards on 6.com. But without any further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Gerardo, to kick us off.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us. I will start this chat, John, by making a declarative statement that is likely to either make a smart man of me or a fool of me. I believe the company will be sold within the next 2 to 3 years for no less than $500 million Canadian. And the reason I believe that is because it's already been sold for more than $500 million Canadian back in 2011. You were able to do what I believe you and the team do best, which is take tough markets, find spectacular projects, get them at very shareholder-friendly prices, and then build out a resource base that begs for a takeout. So with that being said, let me just start by asking for you to provide a brief primer on your background and some of the past successes that you've had.
A small field office in the mountains here. The backdrops for the fireside chat, but we may experience a few lags on it. So I think I caught most of that, Gerardo. Thanks very much for the introduction, and thanks, Six, for setting this up on it. And I appreciate your prognostication on this going forward. But one of the reasons we put our hands on this asset is we're a group that specializes in identifying large or projects that have potential to be very large copper or copper gold deposits, capturing those in a either a down cycle in the market or when the party that has it doesn't want to continue with the project for some reason. And when we identified the Altar project in Argentina as one of these type assets that we like to put our hands on, we jumped on the opportunity. So we're really excited to be bringing a project back to life. As you mentioned, this is a project that was known. It was drilled out by a previous junior company called Peregrine Metals. And they sold this to Stillwater Mining in 2011 for almost $500 million US at the time. It never really fit with Stillwater. But despite that, they continued to explore it and produce some spectacular results. And when we identified the project, we worked with Stillwater and eventually Sibanye purchased Stillwater to become Sibanye Stillwater. And we arrived at a very nice agreement that will allow us to earn into 80% interest, up to an 80% interest in the project, with Stillwater still as a significant shareholder moving forward on the project, or Sibanye Stillwater is a significant shareholder. So we've spent the last couple of years setting the project back up, reviewing all the data, and despite it having a successful track record in the transaction already, we think that some of the best parts of the project are yet to be discovered. So we're extremely thrilled that we're getting back to a heavy drill program this year, and we'll start to see quite a bit of news flow coming out of the project.
For those that aren't familiar with the Altar Copper Gold Project in San Juan, Argentina, this is a project that has a measured and indicated resource of 11.4 billion pounds of copper, 3.92 million ounces of gold, and nearly 41 million ounces of silver. There's another 1.8 billion pounds of copper, 0.4 million ounces of gold, and I believe something like 5 million ounces of silver in the inferred category. You recently had what is arguably the best drill hole to date, and I say arguably because I know the geos within the team have a couple of holes that they could reference that maybe challenge that, but this is in a part of the project outside of the resource space. So I want to get into the resource, the approach, and kind of the catalyst moving forward, because you're going to be as aggressive this year and this coming year as you have been in quite some time at the project. But we all know that social license in Argentina, in Peru, in Mexico, in all parts of the world is critical if you're going to advance a project and have the support of the local community, which is absolutely, again, pardon the pun, it's critical. Can you speak to some of the efforts that you and the team have made on that front? Because I think it's noteworthy and necessary for companies that maybe are coming into the region, maybe don't have experience in South America, and don't know how to work in a way that values local stakeholders the way your team does.
Absolutely. And you've hit on a really critical part of our strategy and of exploration in general, and that many groups focus on finding great intercepts or lots of pounds or ounces in the ground. But for our strategy to work is we need to do that, but we also need to deliver a project that can be developed into a mine. Particularly if we're going to attract a takeout offer from a major mining company. So a lot of the times it's just as important that we're working on those soft issues on the social side. And we're really fortunate right now in San Juan, Argentina, and that when we look at social sides, we look at all of our stakeholders. So we can start with the government. The government in San Juan has been very pro-mining for some time right now. And we're seeing what will be an absolutely spectacular boom in exploration in San Juan this year. We have our project, but there are another 4 or 5 large copper gold deposits that are being actively explored by our peers right now. There are over 40 drill rigs turning in San Juan right at this moment. It's going to be one of the hot spots for copper gold exploration anywhere in the world this year. And that's because the government is taking steps to attract us to discover and eventually develop projects in the province, which is very, very encouraging. And then when we move from there to the more local stakeholders, the communities that we're in, we're fortunate in that the project doesn't have anybody that lives on the project or frankly very near the project. We're high up in the Andes in a rather remote part of the Andes. But there are people that are downstream from where we are, and our activities influence them, particularly the community of Calangasta is the principal one. And so we're undergoing, in conjunction with our peers and other government agencies, a number of very exciting initiatives. One of the ones that I'm most thrilled about is an education initiative, whereby collaboratively we're providing training opportunities for young people in Calangasta to pick up the type skills to be able to obtain the jobs that our projects produce. It's very important that we're hiring locally as much as possible, but we have to help them be prepared to provide or fill the professions that we need to move the project forward. So that's one example. There are a lot of other things that we do in terms of helping with PPE. We refer to it as materials to help in COVID challenges that we face right now, as well as other education initiatives.
Let's move on to the project. I talked about arguably the best hole drilled recently. There's rigs there right now. We have assays pending. I believe you hit 111 meters of 1.4% copper equivalent. And this is outside of the main resource area. For those that are not familiar with the project, John, can you give us an overview of the Altar Copper Gold project? And then let's get into what you're doing right now, because I think it's going to be extremely consequential in 2022. And full disclosure, I'm biased. I'm a shareholder. I've recently added to my position. I'm on the bid today. So this isn't an exercise in journalistic endeavor for me. This is an exercise in I want to make money, which is why I assume most of you tuned in today. So John, with that, can you speak to everything there?
Yeah, just a quick summary. The Altar system is really a cluster of porphyries, which is commonly what we see in porphyry districts. It consists of at least 4 known centers of mineralization. The 2 that are best known are Altar Central and Altar East. That's where the resource exists right now. And so the resource numbers you referred to earlier with a very substantial, very large resource of copper gold mineralization existing today is quite attractive. But those areas are open for extension. But more interesting is that there's a new zone off to the west that we refer to as radio. And that's where we're following up drill hits from last year. That interval you mentioned of 111 meters of 1.4% copper equivalent, that's in a much broader an interval of over 600 meters of over 0.6 copper equivalent. So it's the type numbers that would really attract us. Particularly in that it's high grade, it has a higher gold content than the rest of the system, and it also, with those grades, opens up the potential for even bulk underground mining. It sits entirely outside of the resource. We had a few holes into it. These were holes that were done by the predecessor company. It's what attracted us to the project. And when we followed up last year, we hit that really nice intercept. And I would have to agree with most of the rest of the team. It is the best because it's a brand new zone. We have similar holes to that back in the main zones, but they're already within the resource. So this is an exciting one. We're following up. We plan to be drilling throughout most of the year with 4 rigs. We have 2 active right now. The 3rd rig is showing up this week, a little bit later than we'd planned. Everybody's scrambling for rigs right now, so the rigs are there. We've secured 4 rigs. The problem is getting the drillers and the supplies to work with the rigs. So the drilling companies are a little late on delivering rigs to all of us that are working right now. But we'll have that 3rd rig going this week, and we hope to have the 4th rig going the first week of January.
You're very experienced in monetizing these types of assets, right? You sold Antares to First Quantum for $650 million after a PEA. A part of the reason why me as a speculator has allocated capital in the company is because I believe the current market cap of $82 million presents a ton of runway, right? And when I say runway, I think the most recent success story coming out of Argentina is Filo Mining, right? That's a stock that went from $1 to $12. And so when I hear you and the team being aggressive with 3-4 drill rigs in 2022, I don't believe, one, it excites me. Two, I believe there's a lot of potential to make money there. But three, I can't recall the last time you had 4 rigs on this project, John.
No, we've taken our first 2 years of this joint venture. We have a joint venture which allows us to earn into a 60% initially of the project for spending $30 million in the ground, paying $15 million in cash, and allowing Sibanye-Stillwater to have 19.9% equity in Aldebaran and the 20% equity in the project if we earn into 80. So that's our agreement to earn into it. But the first 2 years have been rather quiet. And it's because we needed to set the project up. When we acquired the project, it had a lot of drilling. It had a large resource that was evident already. It had these indications that it could be much larger. But what we found is it really didn't have a lot of the fundamental data sets that we like to see as an exploration group. And these include, there wasn't really a proper surface geologic map of the project. There was very little geophysical data available. And so we spent the first 2 years putting all of that together because we believe there's significantly more to be discovered and perhaps the best parts to be discovered still in the district. So that's quiet work. It's hard work. It doesn't produce a lot of headlines on it and not a lot of drilling. We did a small amount of orientation drilling in that time with only 2 rigs for a few months at a time. This year we'll have the 4 rigs, and we've substantially extended the field season by cutting a new road in, which eliminates the 2 high passes to get into the project. So our field season now will open up from, we started drilling in November, and we'll be able to drill to May or June this year. Traditionally, we've only been able to work from January to April on the project due to these high passes that we had to cross. So much longer year, many more drill rigs, and a lot more data flow. So I think we're well positioned to get this back to be visible, and there can't be a better time with these copper prices right now and all the activity that's going on in San Juan.
Let's talk copper. It's one of the few commodities that, I think whether you lean politically to the right, to the left, agnostic, it has pretty overwhelming bipartisan support around the world because of this transition, right? What Nick Hodge likes to call the electrification of everything. It can't happen without copper. Can you speak to what you're seeing out there, John, and hearing as it relates to copper demand and just kind of the future for that? Because again, clearly I'm biased. What are your thoughts in the copper space? $6-7 a pound copper here in the next 2 to 3 years isn't out of the question. Again, another declarative statement that kind of pulls out the crystal ball and has the potential to make a fool of me. Perfectly content to play that part. But I think, look, the electrification of everything cannot happen without copper. It can't happen without the commodities that are essential to building things. And that's what I was asking, John, was your take on the copper space, being that you're active and you're out there in the field seeing this.
So John's just going to re-enter and hopefully we'll have a better internet connection. But Gerardo, I have some questions for you in the meantime.
Fire.
All right, perfect. So what are your top 3 factors that you look for when investing in a junior copper stock?
The first one, the way that I was taught and the way that I was brought up 14, 15 years ago in this space is to look at the share structure. I like that over 66, 67% of the shares are held by 2 long-term strategic shareholders. So share structure to me speaks a lot about the way management views investors, right? There's companies that have billions of shares outstanding. They don't know who owns them. They don't care who owns them. That to me says something about the way you view your shareholders. So the very first thing I look at is the share structure of a company. That's critical to me because you could have the best intercepts in the world. You could have the best resource in the world. If the share structure isn't in place to maximize profits, I'm going to lose out as a speculator. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, and John and his team have this in spades, and I referenced it earlier, is does the management team know how to do what it says it's trying to do, right? What John and his team are trying to do is sell this project for a lot more than what it's worth right now. And so when I see that they've sold the Antares project for $650 million in South America, a similar type project, that speaks to me as an investor and speculator, because it gives me the confidence to allocate capital in a company, and that capital is going to be allocated properly. So that would be the second thing is, does the management team know how to do what it says it's going to do for me as a shareholder?
Great. Thank you so much. Well, hopefully, John, your connection is a bit better now.
I hope so. So my apologies. We're a little bit limited here in the field on the field connection. So
as a shareholder, I like you in the field, John, just to be clear.
Okay, great.
I was asking for your take on the copper space. I kind of gave another declarative statement there. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see $6, $7 copper. I don't think we have to for this project to be successful, but I'd love to hear your take about copper, about the need for it if the electrification of everything is going to materialize the way it seems it's going to materialize, which is, a decade-long trend, not a year or a 2-year trend.
Absolutely. You've hit on the real key points here is that there's a remarkable shift in demand that we're already starting to experience, and it'll only become stronger right now. And it's becoming much more difficult for us to find these type of assets. You've seen groups like ourselves, say Ross Beatty's Lumina Copper Group, the Lundin Group, put our hands on these type of assets and drill them out and typically sell them to majors over the last 20 or 30 years. But it's very difficult for us to find new ones right now. That's why we jumped on this opportunity. And it's even more difficult for the major miners to put them into production. And so I just don't see any way that in the copper industry that we're going to be able to keep up with the demand that we're going to be experiencing in the next few years. So we don't need those elevated copper prices for a project. I'm frankly happy at anything north of $3 copper, but I do agree with you. We're very likely to see copper price move up even more substantially from right now, and that's very important for us. The type asset we look for is one that will make money even at low metal prices. That's important because we're looking for assets that will be developed over decades. And so the type of company who would like to acquire it has to factor in the possibility of low prices at times. So they look for projects that have that quality to them that can make money at almost any point in the price cycle. But why we like to see these higher prices is because the companies, the large copper companies or gold companies are interested in copper assets as well, are starting to pile up a lot of cash at these metal prices. And when they pile up a lot of cash, they get motivated to go out and acquire things. So I think we're just beginning to see the first indications that we're entering into a pretty serious M&A cycle in the copper space and the gold space both right now.
With fiscal and monetary policy around the world being completely out of control, right? If when COVID showed up, the solution was to print around the world. Now that there's a variant, the solution is to print some more, right? We haven't touched on the gold component of this project. And so I think because of the huge copper resource, the 4 million ounces of gold across all categories kind of get lost in the mix. And frankly, if all you were a gold company with 4 million ounces of gold with current prices, you'd still be an attractive speculation for me, right? Without the 13 billion pounds of copper. Can you speak to the gold component of the project?
Well, let's take a look at that from two aspects. One is just the geologic aspect. We're in a stretch of the Andes that's well known for its large copper or copper molybdenum deposits. And there's the one thing that's a little bit different about Altar for where we sit is that it has an unusually high gold content to it, and particularly in this new radio zone that we're attacking right now. And it's largely due to the chemistry, the intrusive rocks. We won't go into the details of the geology behind why we think there's increased gold content. But what's really interesting to us is that over the last few years, we've seen the major gold companies increasingly become interested in acquiring large copper gold assets, porphyries in many cases. And when this initially started to happen, I thought it might be a hedge on trying to get copper into their mix, which I think is a wise choice for them to go forward. But as we understand it more and we interact with the gold companies that are taking a look at our projects, is that it's also what they want is long life mines, and they want to be able to poke a lot of ounces. Companies like Newmont or Barrick or large gold companies really don't make their companies grow on 3 million ounce gold deposits anymore. They need ones that have much more than that to them and much longer mine lives to them. And so that's why they're interested. And that opens up a whole number of new companies that are potential suitors for assets like us. And quite frankly, we find that the gold companies are a little more generous in their acquisition costs too. So we're pretty excited to be able to be interacting with gold companies and have them push the copper companies for interest in assets like what we specialize in delivering.
You just recently were granted an OTCQX listing for U.S. investors. I'm thankful for that because, as I mentioned up top, I am adding to my position pretty actively. You're obviously setting yourself up for what's going to be a very, very busy 2022. I think one of the more important ones in the company's history. You've spent the last 2 years amassing all of this data, right? And I know that tends to be boring for most speculators, but we're at that exciting inflection point where drill rigs are turning, assays are pending, and I believe you are looking to include the radio target into the next PEA. Is that accurate for 2022?
That's the top priority for our drilling program this year, is to get enough holes into radio that we could put out a maiden resource for radio and start to show the potential there. And we almost undoubtedly won't have it all the way drilled out, but we believe that with the extended field season, the number of rigs we'll have enough that we can show that and show the potential that's there. In addition to that, we will be testing for extensions of the known mineralization in Altar Central and Altar East. And we have a couple completely untested satellite targets around those areas as well. So we have a lot of drilling to do this year and probably for another year or two after that.
Hole 42, the one that I referenced earlier, the arguably the best hole that has ever been drilled on this project. Where in the current drilling did you start drilling as it relates to hole 42?
Our first hole, which is underway, it's actually just got completed, is about a 250 meter offset on the surface from that hole. And due to the deviations in the hole down hole, it gets to within about 100 meters. So it's still significant. It's a 100 to 250 meter offset from the hole. It's not simply setting up next to a hot hole and drilling it. We believe this has potential to have significant volume. So if our first hole hits anything significant in it, it's really opening up the size potential of radio.
When are you anticipating assays for that? I imagine that you've been in touch with the labs.
Great question. We don't know the answer to that right now, but I think and the reason for that is because of the amount of activity that's going to be happening in San Juan and in other parts of South America as well, is that we anticipate the labs are going to get hit pretty hard with a lot of sample volume. And so these first holes will begin to see the labs all are preparing for this. They know it's coming, but they do face shortages of manpower. They still have to operate under COVID conditions and kind of restricted numbers of people that can work in spaces. And so we anticipate that the labs will take a little bit of time to turn this around. So I think it'd be fair to say this first hole is just being completed. We probably won't have assays until late January on this hole. And then we face the question of, do we do single hole results or do we wait and group holes together as we go forward? The tendency would probably be more reporting as quickly as we can to get started. And then as we get into the season, we'll probably try to batch holes and put out results, say every 8 to 10 weeks, a batch of drill holes at a time.
When you were having technical difficulties, I spoke to how important share structure is to me. And a part of what really attracted me to the company is the fact that, well over 65% of the shares are held by two major shareholders. Can you speak to the share structure and those partners, because they've been pretty supportive? Yeah,
it's kind of a very key point for how we operate on this. So we have that unusual share structure, and then we have one large shareholder that owns almost 50% of the company. It's a fund out of San Francisco called Route One. They've been long-term supporters of our group. They did very well with Antares. We have a second company called Regulus that operates in Peru that they're supporting well, and they have encouraged, like us, they believe that these opportunities are hard to identify, and they bet on us being in a position with a lot of time on the ground and a lot of knowledge of South America to identify these opportunities. And they've emphasized that if we see one, put our hands on it and they'll help us work out how to capture that. And so the way we were able to spin Aldebaran out of Regulus and capture this required a large cash injection. They put $30 million US into the company to get us started, to allow us to do that. And consequently, they're a 50% shareholder. with pro rata rights, and they've participated in all financing since that point in time. And then to acquire the asset, the agreement was with Sibanye-Stillwater, which results in them being a 19.9% shareholder. So we really have almost 70% of the shares in two strong hands that are very bullish on moving the project forward. As management, we have a significant position, and that leaves a very limited float. So it shouldn't take too much to kind of tighten this structure up and adjust it to where it should be based on the assets we have.
A lot of copper, a lot of gold, PEA coming up, 4 drill rigs, assays pending next to the best hole the company's ever drilled. What am I missing, John?
On the PEA, we're not quite sure on the timing of that just yet on this, and that's because we really want to know what we have. So that's the importance of drilling out that radio zone. So the next step will really be a resource estimate on that. And depending how far along we're at and what we have, then we'll begin to make a decision if we're ready for a PEA on this. So the first PEA is oftentimes your nameplate on the project going forward, and we don't want to do that too early until we know we've seen all the best parts.
Well said. I'm excited for 2022. This was an absolute blast. Anyone else have any questions? I'd love to open it up to the audience.
I can jump in, but yeah, if anyone has any attendee questions, feel free to submit them. But I have another question for you, Gerardo. What is your outlook for the gold market in 2022?
I'm actually extremely bullish about gold in 2022. I actually think we'll end the year here, the last week or two, on stronger footing. Look, it's been a frustrating 14 or 15 months for people that only allocate capital in the gold space, which you shouldn't do, right? There's a lot of ways to make money in this space. But I think the consolidation has been healthy. We've built a base now that, screams $1,800 floor. Does that mean gold can't go down another 100 or 200 bucks? Of course not. Of course it can go down. But I think the last 15 months speak to the fact that this is probably the new normal as it relates to the bottom in the gold price. And if 1,800 gold is the new floor, I can't wait with, the disastrous monetary and fiscal policy around the world to see what happens in 2022. And I don't think that new all-time highs are unreasonable in 2022. And so, when you look at projects like the Aldebaran project and you see the leverage there, not just with copper, not just with gold, but also even with some silver, that makes my contrarian, instincts kind of perk up, and it's why I'm a biased shareholder. So I'm bullish on the gold price in 2022.
Great, thank you. And John, how does the management team handle both the Regulus and Aldebaran? And also congrats on the restart of the Regulus drilling. Do you have any comments about that?
Great question. This is the which child do you prefer question for me here. As I mentioned, when we saw the opportunity to acquire a significant, up to an 80% interest in the Altar project, we did have to think twice about that, because we, as management of Regulus and working on a very exciting project called Anticoria in northern Peru, we had to make a determination if we had the bandwidth and capacity to hold two projects. And Route One very strongly encouraged us to go forward on this. They provide us with the capital to capture the opportunity. And I think our initial reaction was that we'd set up a separate management team on that and kind of oversee it from the background on it. But Route One was insistent that they're betting on us as a management team and that we should be very active on both projects. So one of the things that allowed us to do was deepen our bench. And so we added on a number of key new appointments. Adam Greening is our VP for Corporate Development. Laura, who some of you know, managing our IR. Stan has come on as a VP for development in our project, our first mining engineer in the project, which is a bit different for us. And so we have a much stronger team, and we've also benefited. We have two outstanding teams on the ground in Argentina and Peru. And so that helps us tremendously.
Look, you touched on Regulus, and that's another company that I'm very biased about. Obviously, everyone here knows how I feel about the management team, or I wouldn't have agreed to come on, right? But I think that's another spectacular project that, because of the political upheaval that we've seen in Peru, is trading at a fraction of what it should be trading at. And so a lot to like, a lot of copper, a lot of gold between both projects. And I was mentioning, John, that a great way for you to have more bandwidth is to get one of these projects sold at a significant premium. So that's where we left it before you cut out.
Okay, there we go. We're hoping Elon Musk gets his Starlink set up so we can have better satellite connections here in the field. So,
Okay, well, there are a lot of attendee questions, so I'm just going to jump right in. Christopher's asking, how much cash do you have on hand, and when do you anticipate another capital raise?
we have about $6 million right now, and so it's enough for us to get started on it. But as you might easily guess, with 4 rigs turning and a long field season, we'll very likely be raising capital sometime early next year. We feel it's best for our shareholders right now to get additional information and awareness about the project being out before we do that. But sometime in the early next year, there will likely be a capital raise.
Got it. And Tom is asking, do you see Sibanye-Stillwater as a potential acquirer?
Originally, we probably didn't. But as we began to develop a relationship with them, and keep in mind, when we entered into this agreement, they had only recently acquired this asset. They acquired Stillwater and determined that it didn't really fit their portfolio going forward, and were willing to look for somebody to come in on it. But since that time, they've embarked on a rather aggressive battery metals program that they have, which they're intentionally looking for exposure into copper, nickel, lithium. And they've been very aggressive acquiring assets in the last few months or last year on this. And so we actually now fit very well into their portfolio and where they'd like to take the company going forward. So they're very much watching us. They've got a pole position on this. If they would like to acquire it, they're in a pretty good spot to do so going forward.
Exciting. Thank you. Mark's asking, what are your thoughts on the Alberto Hensel news from Tuesday?
Somebody that knows Argentina well here. Back to Alberto Hensel question. He was formerly the Minister of Mines of San Juan and really instrumental in the change in the attitude towards mining in San Juan and getting it on the map. And as a consequence of that, he became the Minister of Mines for Argentina. But just this week, it's been announced that he's stepping down from that position to go back to San Juan to assume an important ministry position in San Juan, which is almost undoubtedly positioning him to perhaps make a run for the governorship on the next turn in San Juan. So we're actually pretty excited about it. He's a fantastic supporter of mining, and it looks like he's positioning himself to be an important person in San Juan going forward, and we couldn't ask for a better situation than that.
Exciting. Excellent. If there is any internet delays, we might want to try just if you can go camera off and just audio, that might help. But for now, it's working fine. Tom's asking, do you believe your 2 big shareholders are aligned with management and minority shareholders?
Yes, very much so. And it's not just a throwaway answer to that. It's based on our experience with Antares, and particularly with Route 1. It is intimidating sometimes when there's one large shareholder that might have a different direction on things, but they bet on us as management, and we're very much aligned in strategy moving forward. And they have been open that they would, the best thing for us to move and work well is if we don't have shareholder angst due to their presence on this. So even though they participate in virtually every financing we do going forward, there would be opportunities where they'd step aside and allow us to do something. A good example recently was with Regulus, when a Cisco came in on a rather creative deal that Adam Greening, our VP Corporate Development, set up. They embraced that, having them come on and go forward. And so they make room for good quality shareholders, and they are appreciative of that we have a variety of shareholders that have different interests and different capacity to participate in financing. So they do work with us well.
Excellent. Bernard is asking if you can comment on the current valuation of Aldebaran in relationship to its peer group and the 2011 M&A price, considering the investments in the project since then.
I'll see if I can share a slide that'll help a little bit on this. One way we can take a look at a resource like this, it's difficult when you're early stage, particularly when we don't have a PEA out on the project to really see valuations on this. So there are probably 2 things we can take a look at this. One is the value of the company versus how many pounds of copper we have in the ground on this. This is a common metric that we use to take a look at projects. So in this table, what we see is ourselves with a number of other peers with similar assets and similar styles of companies. So in the middle column, we see the total resource. So when we convert it to copper equivalent, we have about 15.2 billion pounds of copper equivalent. That ranks us well with a number of other well-known assets that are, and this is designed to be a list of assets that are potentially acquirable by major mining companies. So peers like ourselves with the same strategy. The average copper grade of our asset is very similar, fits well within the other known on here. But on the left side, we see our value, our market cap or EV per pound of copper equivalent in the ground. And we see that we're currently valued at less than a half a penny US per pound of copper in the ground. We've worked in this space a long time. A typical transaction value for a large asset like this that's just copper without a gold component to it, selling in the market has generally been about 4 cents a pound in the ground. Historically over the last 20 years, or about 1% of the in situ value. And we see other assets like Jose Maria, Sol Gold moving into that 2 to 3 cent per pound in the range. Filo's extremely high right now, and it's partly because a lot of their new results haven't been converted to resource yet. Everybody's anticipating this will get quite a bit larger. But we can see the leverage on moving up. Many of these other assets are outstanding opportunities, good investment opportunities for people. But what I'd like to point out is that this peer group is very significant. It's kind of the old question, do you jump on the story that's already run, or do you catch the one before it's about to run? So I think we're well positioned right now to see a significant re-rating into the range of a number of our peers.
Great, thank you.
The other market on this is what Gerardo mentioned is that this asset was previously purchased by Stillwater for nearly 500 million US, and that was a little less than the 4 cents per pound in the ground at the time that transaction happened. And we see it only as becoming a better project now moving forward.
Great, thank you. I just also, as a reminder, we have a copy of this presentation available for download under the handouts tab on the right-hand side. So if you want, you can download this for yourself and follow along. With that, I think that's a good place to wrap up. There are some other questions that I'll make sure are forwarded to the team so that can answer you directly. But I just want to thank Gerardo and John so much for joining us today for the great chat and discussion and taking us through all these great questions. And of course, as I said earlier, this has been recorded. You can watch it again on 6.com. You can also find more information at aldebaranresources.com. But before I close things off, I'll just pass it back to you, John and Gerardo, for the final word.
John, do the honors. Thank you so much for the opportunity, everybody.
And thank you, Gerardo, and thank you, Dasha and Six, for setting this up. It's a fantastic forum for us. Just in summary, we're an experienced group. We've put our hands on a great asset, and we're about to make a significant shift in news flow on the project and visibility on the project. So I think it's a fantastic time to identify a group like ourselves, an asset like what we have, to move forward, and we're excited to begin to meet a lot of new people. We've only been able to touch a little bit on the project in this forum. I would make reference to our website where there's a lot of information, and particularly a video series that's put together by Kevin Heather, our Chief Geologic Officer, with Laura doing a lot of the editing in the background on that. And it provides a lot of the details, particularly the technical details on the projects, and you can see much more about our philosophy, how we approach this, and what we're doing to be able to prepare this project to be attractive for a major mining company to acquire in the future. So thank you for your time, and any questions you have, please contact us.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.